everyone for joining us this evening for Lupus Canada's Let's Talk Lupus webinar. Tonight we're joined by Jodie Nimigon-Young, who will be discussing stress management during the holidays. Jodie is currently a healthcare social worker helping patients and families adjust to life-changing diagnosis and connecting them with relevant community resources. I'll just start with a few housekeeping items to address. As we noted earlier, all attendees will be in listen-only mode. Both audio and video have been disabled. Should you have a question, please put it in the chat box and we'll be sure to address it throughout the webinar or at the end of the webinar. We hope you find this webinar informative. I'll now pass this over to Ariana Ranjabar, who is our moderator for this evening. Ariana?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Ariana Ranchbar. I'll be the moderator. If you have any questions or concerns, please put it in the chat box. And if it's something that needs to be addressed right away, I'll be sure to address it to Jodie. If not, we'll wait until the Q&A at the very end. So thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you, Jodie, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining, for taking the time to join us. Well, for me, it's this evening, but depending on where you are joining us from, it may be a different time of day for you. So we appreciate that you're taking the time for yourself to be here. My name is Jodie, and I am a lupus patient as well as a social worker, as was mentioned. And I have a bit more of an introduction on another slide to get us going as we start to talk about managing stress during the holidays. Perfect. Opening slide. Sounds good. So stress management. It says from a patient perspective, but certainly there's information from my perspective as living with lupus and my perspective as being a healthcare social worker and things that I have learned over the years from wearing different hats. Yes, I'll just pause for a second just to double check. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Cora, for answering that you can you can see the slides. It's good to confirm before we get too much further into things this evening. So just a little bit of brief history for my own lupus journey. It's a very similar story to a lot, so it's definitely a story we have all or most of us have heard before. I was diagnosed at the age of 13 at Sick Kids, and so that was 29 years ago now. And that was following having symptoms since the age of 4. I was actually tested at the age of 8, and testing came back inconclusive. And so it took a few more years and more symptoms for everything to be more clear of the diagnosis for lupus. And of course, right away, then we start into what can we do for managing stress in addition to reducing sun exposure and improving sleep and all of these things, all those S words that we know are important in terms of managing our lupus. And one of the things that was mentioned right off the bat was mindfulness for sleep and improved pain control. And since my diagnosis, I have been involved at the local level, provincial level, national level. I've presented at international conferences, and I am co-author for the book Fabulupus along with Jessica Kundapar. I'm also a mother, I'm a social worker, I have a little side business of sewing and embroidery in my spare time. But what I can say is that I had one major flare only at my time of diagnosis. I've had a few little blips that we caught early enough that I noticed there were some things going on and that we intervened appropriately, whether it be with medication or time off work or whatnot. And so that, I think, says that there's maybe some things that hopefully we can be sharing with you tonight that might be some new things to think about for managing your own stress during the holidays, but also in general. So some of the practical strategies that I tend to use in terms of managing my stress, and some of these you might already do, maybe you do all of them already. Sleep is a very important thing for me, and that is both nighttime sleep as well as naps as needed. I do, very proudly to say, I take a nap every day that I am able to, which at this point really means just Saturday and Sundays. However, that's okay. Movement for me is important every day, depending on what my body permits. And so that can be sometimes a full HIIT class, that sometimes is just yoga. Sometimes the movement, like when I had COVID last week, was literally just moving around my house was enough. But I do integrate as much movement as possible, and integrating fresh air into that movement whenever possible, because that just augments in terms of the stress response for your body. Social supports are crucial, but I have learned through my lupus journey that sometimes people come and go that maybe are more or less understanding and more or less helpful with your lupus needs, or the way that you need to maybe be modifying plans or canceling plans. And that's okay. That's something that I've learned and I've just kind of digested over time. And right now I'm very thankful that I have a great network around me. Financial stability, I know this is something that is a struggle for a lot of people living with lupus, and that impacts on your family as well. But keeping financial stability in mind, it has led to some life choices for me in terms of, I'm fortunate, I'm able to be working at this time. However, it led to some choices of an employment that had health benefits, as opposed to an employment that does not have health benefits, or employment where I'm self-employed and would not be able to access any health benefits. Since I was diagnosed at such an early age, I can't apply to any sort of private coverage. The energy boosting activities. So this is always a delicate one, right? Because sometimes we're feeling so fatigued and overwhelmed that the thought of doing something that we enjoy feels like we're adding something else to our calendar. But in the end, the kickback from that, in terms of the boost of energy and just those feel good hormones and all of the positive that comes from doing an activity you enjoy, whether it be on your own or with others, is very important. Not necessarily every day, but regularly. Constantly reprioritizing and communicating that, both, like, not just myself adjusting to anything that I need to reprioritize and being okay with any of those changes, but communicating that to all of those around me. And that is at home, that is with other family, that's with friends, that's in the workplace, always needing to kind of rejuggle of those priorities to meet my energy needs on any given day. And most importantly, I've learned that we need to be taking those moments every day to just breathe and just to enjoy the moment. I had a lovely moment earlier this afternoon when I was at my children's bus stop, and I was just watching this squirrel run up and down the tree, gathering things and running up the tree to continue building its nest. And it was just this moment that I was just sitting and enjoying. I could have been annoyed the bus was late, or I could have had other thoughts kind of stewing over in my mind, but I purposely, consciously took that moment to just observe and just enjoy. So when it comes to mindfulness, this is something I've really kind of taken a bit of a dive into. And as I mentioned earlier, something that was mentioned when I was diagnosed at 13, the clinical nurse lead at Sick Kids at the time mentioned it as something and provided some breathing exercises that might help me fall asleep. And that helped, but I never really went anything deeper to it. But then throughout my life since then, in the 29 years since, there's been other things, other instances and other opportunities that have led to me to be re-exposed to mindfulness in different settings, both professionally and personally. And so it really seems like life was really trying to say, this is the direction to go. This is going to help you. And you really need to think about this. So it's really interesting how life sometimes points us in a certain direction, and sometimes we really need to listen to that, as opposed to, you can question it, but as opposed to pushing back and trying to forge another direction. So mindfulness really is paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So you're not judging your thoughts or your feelings or any sensations you have. And it can be both formal practice where you set aside time every day, or it can be the informal practice like I did earlier today, where I'm just like, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna make the best of this, and I'm just going to enjoy watching the squirrel, right? And part of the tenets of mindfulness is the intention behind your activity, the attention, so where is your attention, your attitude, and always being open to learning. And it's really interesting because those are always things that I have carried through in life. And as mindfulness has come to me through professional counseling that I have sought on my own, as well as job opportunities that I've been offered where I needed to provide mindfulness and stress management to patients. It's interesting because those were all things I was already kind of naturally drawn to do as an individual. So it's really helped me holistically. There's a lot of different types of mindfulness, and there's a lot of different ways that mindfulness might be incorporated. Yoga is a very common activity that a lot of people are maybe more familiar with that does incorporate aspects of mindfulness in certain types of practices, but there's a lot of other ways, a lot of other directed ways for mindfulness, but a lot of other ways to incorporate it as well. So this was just a slide in terms of reminding you that part of mindfulness, if we're really in the moment and paying attention and not being judgmental if our thoughts wander, but bringing ourselves to try to really focus in the moment, one thing at a time, what we're doing, then in that moment you have no stress, because then you're not thinking about the past and you're not thinking about the future, and you're really just doing what you need to be doing in the moment. And that is always very helpful when you're trying to balance all these different things in life in addition to living with a chronic health condition. So the main tenets for a mindfulness practice is not judgment, which was mentioned already. Patience, something we all, including myself, continue to need to practice. A beginner's mind, and a beginner's mind is really that sense of always learning, always open to new opportunities, always having an open mind to trying something. And ultimately, if you've done the same exercise 10 times already, the 11th time, it's still your first time doing it, because maybe your energy is different on that day, or maybe you have a different amount of pain, or you're in a different setting, a different environment. So it's still a new experience. Trust. Trust is a very challenging one, to kind of trust you are where you're meant to be and you're going where you're meant to go, and trust that things are going to work out, and trust that you're okay. And all of these aspects of trust is a very challenging one, but it is something that mindfulness encourages us to work on. Non-striving is interesting because you're not striving towards achieving more or becoming better. But that's always a fine balance, because you're also always wanting to learn and have a beginner's mind. So it's a little bit of being humble in a non-striving way. Acceptance is a great one for everyone, especially living with lupus and living with chronic health conditions. It is a huge one and can take a lot of work, sometimes some therapy, and a lot of practice and a lot of good support around us to accept what has changed, where we're at, maybe what has changed in terms of what we thought our life would look like in the future. And that's one that I really like from a mindfulness perspective. And then that leads into the letting go. So that's letting go of those expectations or those shoulds of things that way that we had thought our life would be, or maybe those shoulds of what we thought for those around us. And then some things that I add in terms of my experience personally and professionally from using mindfulness for stress management is just breathing into everyday moments. And it's a little bit of like stopping to smell the flowers. And sometimes young kids are much better at this than us, where they just stop and they really enjoy looking at everything. It can be that crack in the sidewalk. It can be the birds flying overhead. And they really just notice all these little things that when we get caught up going through the motions of day to day, sometimes we can forget. And we know the research shows that even just stopping and taking 2 minutes of breathing can make a big difference in reducing that stress response in your body. So really breathing into everyday moments is a big one. And then noticing those glimmers. Glimmers is a new term in the last couple of years, but the glimmers is really noticing those little positive moments every day, because sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier to notice those little moments, but we do have them all every day. And it could be as something as simple as enjoying the warmth of having your hands around that first cup of coffee in the morning, right? Or something really small. And that when we're really busy in our day-to-day, we may not notice those little things, but it can make a really big difference in terms of just our overall perspective on life and our mental health and everything else that we do, to really appreciate the small things that can make it easier to manage some bigger stressors. So a little bit of information with regards to the benefits of mindfulness in lupus patients. So there is some research out there on it, and it's all very positive of mindfulness-based group therapy benefit for lupus patients. And it's all with regards to improving your non-judgment towards yourself and others, your acceptance, your self-compassion. It decreases any mental health symptoms, which is huge because we know lupus patients are statistically more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety and other mental health diagnoses, and also overall improving your quality of life, which is great, right? And it's a non-invasive approach. So that's also very helpful because we all go through so many things, including I had one of my weekly injections earlier today of these things that are, invasive to different levels. So it's nice to have something that's easy and non-invasive. Some general research about the benefits of mindfulness and from a mindfulness perspective for stress management. And these are benefits to other conditions, but certainly overlap for lupus patients because there's benefits for rheumatoid arthritis, for heart disease, for MS, for stroke, for fibromyalgia, for IBS, for chronic fatigue, for anxiety, diabetes, all sorts of things, right? And so just to say, even though there's only a little bit of research specific to the benefits on lupus, there's a lot of research out there for the benefits for a lot of other chronic health conditions. And a lot of them overlap for our lupus patients, right? So that's just to keep that in mind too. So diving more into our actual topic for tonight in terms of stress and stress management during the holidays. But before I get into talking about the stress management during the holidays, just taking it back a step to what is stress, right? And stress really is that imbalance between our load and our capacity to manage that load. And that can be a real load or a perceived load. Sometimes, our head perceives something as being stressful that maybe somebody else doesn't perceive as being stressful, versus there can be the actual physical load of all those day-to-day tasks. And then the capacity to manage can be our own capacity to manage, but also the capacity of those around us to support us. And what the research shows us too is just knowing you have someone you can turn to who maybe has expertise in something, or you have someone you can turn to just to vent, knowing you have those people around you as a support is helpful in and of itself of decreasing your stress response, even if you don't reach out to them. So that's always awesome to hear. And then the capacity to cope is also real and perceived, right? So that's your internal, and like I just said, your external capacity. So that's just all a different way of saying what I verbalized. Now, the physiological responses are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the stress response in your body is the sympathetic nervous system. That floods your body with a ton of different hormones that then affects all sorts of different body systems. And then that can lead to what some people might be more familiar with in terms of the fight or flight response. Or sometimes it's a freeze. Sometimes that flood of hormones, your body just freezes. But more often than not, it's a fight or a flight. So you kind of attack the stressor or you run away from it. And in our everyday life, that still happens in lots of different circumstances. And then the parasympathetic system is the calming down system. So when we are doing self-care, when we're taking 2 minutes to deep breathe, when we're doing activities we enjoy, when we are taking time to ourselves, we are activating that parasympathetic system. And that's decreasing the stress response. And that's what we want to be aiming to do on a regular basis, because we want to decrease the impact on all of our systems and decrease the chance of a lupus flare, but also it benefits all sorts of other things. It decreases your chance of a cardiovascular event. It improves your diabetes and like your insulin management. And there's lots of other systems. It affects all of your systems, right? The stress response does. So even if we can't completely eliminate stress, or even if we can't completely keep everything balanced, We want to do everything we can to be regularly activating the parasympathetic system to decrease some of those stress hormones in our body. So stress management, we can talk about a lot of different things, right? And some main things that often come up are signs of sources of stress, time management, and communication. And so communication, all of these kind of are key heading into the holiday season. So just to talk a little bit about each of them, the signs and sources of stress as lupus patients can be critical to really get to know ourselves. And a lot of times, one of the odd benefits of living with a chronic health condition is that you are very acutely aware of yourself, right? Any little thing that's different, you're very aware of that. But I found over time, having those quiet moments where I can dial into myself more regularly, I can notice sooner if something's a little bit off than if I'm always on the go or if I'm always in my head, right? So physically on the go or mentally on the go. So the signs of stress are those things that you notice in your physical self, or maybe there's a change in your behaviors, maybe there's a change in your emotion management, or maybe a change in your cognition, like you're having a harder time remembering things or staying focused, which I know overlaps a little bit with the lupus fog, which is a whole other thing. But the signs you want to be paying attention to and starting to see if you notice any patterns. And then the sources of stress are all those things that maybe lead to you more often having signs of stress. So the sources of stress can be some of those everyday hassles. We all have those days where, you spilled your coffee and you've dropped your keys, and then, your shoelaces get tied up, and all of this happens before you even head out the door, for example, right? So there can be these everyday stressors that just can accumulate on us. There can be environmental stressors, which actually can be very critical for lupus patients in terms of the changes in the barometric pressure, the colder weather, and the darker weather that it's already dark at 5 o'clock here these days. And that can really have an impact in terms of your stress management because it impacts all of your overall systems and different hormones in your body. There can be the social stressors, which that can fall into the communication piece, but it's also the financial stressors and anything else on the social spectrum. There can be the psychological stressors, and that goes back to some of that self-talk that we do of worries about the future, worries about the past, any ruminations you might have, but also any of that negative self-talk that we do of, I'm overwhelmed, I can't cope with this, I don't know how I'm going to do it, or anything even more negative than that. And so there's a whole bunch of different types of sources of stress. We want to try to pay attention to what makes us more likely to be feeling stressed. And that can be different for all of us. Some of us are more, and even on a very simplistic level, some of us are more apt to be feeling stressed when we have a lot of things on the to-do list. Some of us are more apt to be feeling stressed if we are having maybe an argument with a loved one, right? And so even if we just simplify it and say, are you stressed with lots of things to do, or are you stressed when there's something going on with a loved one? But you can also get down to more specifics. Time management, also very much related to stress management. We can divide our time into like a work or productive. It says work, but it's really like the productive tasks. And so those are all the things that we do to feed ourselves and to wash ourselves, and maybe productive work, maybe volunteer work. It's those types of tasks. And then there's the social, and we have the benefit of technology to be connecting socially in lots of different ways. And there's different things we can do socially. A great tip in terms of blending both is sometimes, you can do one of your activities that you need for your daily living, go do grocery shoppings and socialize with a friend instead of trying to fit in too many things at the same time. But we want to be paying attention to trying to have things in each of the three categories on a regular basis, and that can help regulate some of that stress response over time. And then there's the self-care area. And often this is the area that we can struggle with the most in terms of finding time, but it's also the most critical. And what I wanted to remind everyone, I had someone once tell me, it is not selfish to be, you have to be sometimes selfish to be selfless. And that's really, that's that old adage of you have to put your own oxygen mask on first to be able to be there for others. And so we want to always be trying to carve out some self-care time. And sometimes the categories can overlap with the different types of activities you're doing, but we also want to be cognizant in the moment of what we're doing to really reap the full benefit. And then the communication piece, which is huge heading into the holidays. And when it comes to managing stress, communication with those around us of what we need, what we can do, what we need to change, what we can no longer do. Sorry, last week I said this, but now I need to say this. Very critical. And we can control in terms of our needs by expressing to others what we've noticed, what our changes are, in an assertive, very respectful manner, expressing our needs to others. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, sometimes we can't always control others' reactions, but we can control our own. And then that comes back to some of that self-care and that self-talk to ourselves to manage some of those emotions that we might experience during or after some types of communication that maybe leave us feeling, kind of upset with how the other person has reacted or how they've spoken to us. Ultimately, we need to remind ourselves that if we are doing what we need to do to take care of ourselves in the moment, that is the most critical. And that's absolutely not selfish at all, because you're a lupus patient living with a chronic condition. And that is a constant reprioritizing. And that's a constant trying to take care of yourself. And often, yes, we have other needs. We have other people who need us or are looking forward to doing something with us. But that's where the constant communication is important. And we need to be easy on ourselves and trying not to be too judgmental about what we thought we would be doing, and some of that acceptance piece for where we're at presently. So some things to think about, expanding that a little bit further, some things to think about when we're talking holidays and stress. It is absolutely a very challenging time of year. There's a lot of expectations of what has happened in the past, maybe things you're looking forward to doing now, expectations from others on events that you're going to attend or things you're going to do. And that could be someone's looking forward to you baking your famous cookies, but you just don't know that you have the energy or time to do that this year. And so it's expectations on both sides. And there's the traditions, which a lot of people look forward to. But unfortunately, or fortunately, a lupus patient, we do need to be able to juggle some of those expectations related to traditions that sometimes we are not able to do it all every year. But maybe that's where some of the priorities come in, or maybe that's where some flexibility comes in on, okay, we want to meet this tradition, but how can we do it in a way that I can still participate this year? Because these are my limits right now. So again, this is where all the communication stuff is coming in, and it's so key at the holiday season. And even, sometimes we're talking holiday season now because it's really starting to be crunch time on November 30th. But some of these conversations you can keep in mind. I know some of them start earlier, right? Some of them start in the summertime or earlier in the fall season. It's also that time of year, like I was saying, the weather. The weather has changed. October was absolutely terrible for changes in barometric pressure. And I know anybody I know with arthritis was suffering terribly, including myself. It was absolutely a really painful time. I don't know what it was with the weather patterns this year and just the weather changes, but it was really particularly difficult to cope. And now we're heading into, we're almost at the darkest day of the year in, December 21st. That's coming up very soon, actually. And that can be very hard for people, right? Because you're not having as much daytime hours, which means you you feel like you don't have as many hours with not only sunlight, but just enough hours to be doing some of those other things, because we feel like kind of hunkering down when it gets dark out. And then it can decrease our motivation, which then can play on our mental health or some of our social, and then that can play on some of those shoulds and expectations and everything. So we want to be really mindful on anything we notice for our stress response and our coping and our mood when there's weather changes that are happening, and paying attention to some of those winter blues that might be starting to creep up because there hasn't been enough vitamin D in Canada since September. Talked to my doctor about that a couple of weeks ago. She confirmed. So we can start to feel some of those changes in vitamin D or other things that really can affect all of our systems too. And on top of all of that, we have all of our regular commitments, which then you're having to start to negotiate between all of these. What can I do? What can I not do? And that's negotiating with yourself, really sitting back and really reflecting on how do I feel? What can I be doing? And accepting and being gentle with yourself, and maybe breathing into it a little bit to relax and just be okay that some of those commitments are having to go by the wayside. And then we can talk about, I left an extra square. I like leaving an extra square whenever I have any lists, because it just kind of leaves that space that, maybe you have some questions or maybe you have your own thoughts for other things related to holidays and stress. Now, holiday stress and benefits. Stress is both positive and negative. Stress is neutral. Everything in life could be perceived as a stress, right? So we want to look at the holidays from both perspectives, because that can really help our perspective on things, and that can really help then our acceptance, and that can help our mood, and that can help actually with some of those conversations when you're trying to negotiate and trying to talk about those traditions and those expectations. There can be benefit to the social. You might need to modify a little bit, but there's certainly benefits to social. Often we try to have a lot of social events over the holiday season. Maybe we should stretch that out a little bit, not cram it all in such a short time, but there's certainly benefits to social events. And so we want to keep that in mind. We want to be in those events that we do participate in. We want to really be in the moment and really enjoy that feeling of being with those that we love, and hopefully those that understand. And so we want to have some of those little glimmers in those social moments. As much as it can be challenging to fit in those traditions and those expectations, those are a lot of very meaningful, rich activities. And so we want to be carrying that with us. We want to really be cognizant and aware of those meaningful activities that are going to bring us forward memories that we can be, thinking about, or maybe photos that we can look back on, stories that we can talk about later. And so we want to think about that too. And it can help to build connection. That's what a lot of those social gatherings and those commitments and those traditions can do. It can build connection, or maybe it's a new activity you're deciding to do all together, and that can build connection if it's something new. And that can be the benefit of suggesting new things, of suggesting how to modify something, because then it's a new experience for everyone, and then that can actually build a new connection or a new type of connection. The holidays can be a pleasure of the senses, which can be great as a chronic health person living with lupus, because often different activities can be centered around maybe one sense. And so I really encourage you to think about all your different senses during all your different holiday gatherings or different events or whatever you are able to do, and really take pleasure in that. It can be a simple pleasure of just sitting at home and enjoying, if you have Christmas decorations up, or other lights that, other special lights or candles, and really just enjoying that, right? Just really enjoying the special moments, that the visual that comes with those lights, or maybe it's special foods that you can smell and taste. And so there's a lot of different senses that maybe we don't normally think about other times of the year. The holiday stress and also can be a benefit because for a lot of people, it's very spiritual or religious. And that in and of itself is actually very mindful. A lot of prayer and a lot of religious ceremony is very spiritual and very mindfulness based. And so that can bring huge benefits in terms of decreasing your stress response if you can actually be in the moment of those spiritual ceremonies and spiritual traditions. So if you can be in the moment and not thinking about, okay, after this is done, I have to go do this, and okay, oh no, we need to just be there and really partake and reap the full benefit of some of those spiritual traditions that you may be participating in. So those are my thoughts on stress, mindfulness, things that have helped me personally and professionally, and then how do we package it all together for what are some things to think about heading into the holiday season. A few more quotes. As you can tell, I love inspirational quotes. I also love memes, but I went with some quotes for the slides. And I did have a few slides as well in terms of some resources that perhaps you're interested in accessing. And so I know that those will be available to you to consider or maybe explore after the webinar. And then some research. If you're really a research person, I did include all of the references. So thank you very much for all of your attention. I'm not sure if there's any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Jodie. That was wonderful. And I love some of those some of those quotes that you provided at the end. They're always nice. And I really took to heart some of the information you shared, and being in the moment. I think that's a tough one for a lot of us, to be in that moment and enjoy the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to what you said at the beginning of the webinar, how you watched the squirrel, and that's just enjoying the moment and not letting the other stuff sort of make you crazy. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't see any questions in the chat box. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. A lot of times people are still mulling stuff over, and this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website in about 24 hours. So for folks that want to look back over or share it with friends and family, it's a great resource. And thanks to Jodie, she also provided a lot of links, a lot of some references at the end that folks can revisit as well.
Yeah, I don't see any questions, but maybe we can just quickly, I will do my little spiel. So Lupus Canada has a Give 12 monthly program. So if you want to join our Give 12 program, this donor program allows Lupus Canada to keep working towards offering educational resources, continue our advocacy work, our public awareness campaigns, funding our student scholarships, our Catalyst grants, and so forth, that just ultimately allow us to continue working towards improving the lives of Canadians living with lupus, and working towards one day hoping to find having a life without lupus. So I guess that is all. So maybe we'll say our goodbyes. Thank you so much, Jodie, again, for joining us and offering this very important educational webinar for everyone. Again, it's such a great resource for people to look back to, and hopefully, yes, share with their friends and family so that they can also understand how the season can affect their mental and physical health. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Jodie. Thank you, Ariana, for moderating, and thank you to those who joined. And we wish everyone a very happy and healthy holiday season, and take to heart some of Jodie's recommendations. I know I definitely will. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye, Jodie. Bye, Ariana.